Today, my students and I will start by sharing our class data. We invite the audience to participate as well. Please raise your hand if you've ever been detained and questioned by police. If you've been detained and questioned by police 3 or more times. If you've had an immediate family member incarcerated for a significant period of time. If you've been shot at. If you've seen someone get shot. If you've had a close loved one murdered. This is my 10th year of teaching, and so-called at-risk youth and I have always gravitated towards each other. But 6 years of watching countless youth move steadily on a conveyor belt to destruction led me to a devastating realization that I, despite my best efforts, had made almost zero difference in the lives of students I most wanted to reach. Zero. Forget turning off the conveyor belt, I couldn't think of a single instance where I had even slowed it down. And when I started this survey, I realized why. I had been applying my solutions to their situations without even asking them their situations. This realization came through my partnership with these young men I met in my leadership class at Robert E. Lee High School in an effort we call the Evac movement. In just over 1 year, and with no formal curriculum, training, or funding, these young men went from being labeled as at risk to being recognized as at hope youth leaders whose accomplishments include speaking at the White House, meeting President Obama, making the front page of the New York Times, and winning first prize in a contest sponsored by Harvard. That's how I feel too. Despite enormous risk factors, these young men stand here today with hope. How did they get here, and how do we empower other youth to get here too? We start with their story, and here it is. Our story starts with Plato's allegory of the cave, a philosophy piece written 2,500 years ago about prisoners who've been chained in a cave since birth. They are unaware of their chains or that they're even in a cave until one day a liberator descends the steps, unbinds their chains, and leads them to the light. In 2013, the best teacher I know, Mr. Reginald Vineyard, introduced me to the cave, and it's been my first lesson of the year ever since. In 2014, these young men entered their 9th grade year, sprinkled among my 6 co-ed leadership classes. And that year I started a new assignment, sharing your story. Students read The Cave, then watched The Lion King, tracing Simba's journey of grief as a model to analyze their own difficult experiences. These young men stood out because they were among the first to do the assignment's optional portion, sharing their stories. And sharing changed them. My close friend and classroom volunteer, Jay Harris, one day looked around and said to me, "Amy, something's happening here, and it needs a name." He wrote something down, handed it to me, and said, "What does cave backwards spell?" Evac. He said, "Amy, sharing their stories is evacuating them from hopelessness. This is an evac movement." So, my principal agreed to my request to teach a Part 2 leadership course with some of these same young men and women the next school year. But in June, there was an abrupt principal change, leading me to go up to the school to get the new principal's approval to teach it, which he gave, but with a catch. Due to racial disparities in education, he wanted the course to be all African American young men. I said, "I fully support that, but as a white female, I am not the right person for this." And he pushed back, saying I was the only teacher with room in my schedule. Basically, it was me or no class. So that fall, our journey began their sophomore year, and it was a disaster. Students either didn't know each other or didn't like each other. They fought. I cried. Every single lesson I taught fell flat. And in desperation, we went back to the one thing that yet again changed everything: writing their stories. And then Kimon, the only one who in 9th grade never wrote or shared his story, asked to share. And our class changed forever that day in his bravery as he came to the front of the room and shared that the summer before 9th grade, his brother had been murdered, and that until now, he never talked about it. After, his classmates began sharing that many of them too had lost brothers, and they too didn't know how to deal. And by the end of class, they were fighting again. But this time, over who got to share next. And every class for the next 2 months, a different student shared, and a brotherhood was formed. And soon one said to me, "This has been great, but when are we going to do something about all this?" So, I had a great idea. Since many of their stories involved traumatic police stops, I had invited local officers in to teach them their rights. And they'd be here next class. Wasn't that great? The classroom erupted. F the police. They weren't censored either. I'm not coming. And then I erupted, and I said, if that's your attitude, then go ahead and drop the class, because that's not leadership. But I will never forget when one of them raised his hand and with incredible grace said, "Miss Donofrio, we understand what you're saying, but you haven't been handcuffed face down on concrete. You haven't had guns pulled on you and dogs sicked on you for jaywalking." He pointed to a classmate and said, "You haven't missed your mom's funeral because you were illegally detained. We understand what you're saying, but this runs deep." And I was so ashamed and just floored by my own ignorance. And I immediately said I'd cancel. But they told me not to. And the next class, every single young man showed up. Unfortunately, the visit was essentially a lecture on respecting authority, but the person who set it up, Mr. Frank Talbot, asked to come back and address some of their unanswered questions. And he continued not only to come back, but began bringing his colleagues. It was these young men sharing their stories, and adults with power were literally taking notes. And soon we were becoming more than a class, and we needed a name. And so one said, "How about Cave?" And we laughed, but then Jay said, "How about Evac?" And from there, the opportunities just escalated. In April, 2 were chosen to go to the U.S. Department of Justice in D.C. In August, 4 other students presented at a National Youth Summit. And a few weeks later, we were asked to interview for a juvenile justice article. To our utter shock, that article ran on the front page of the New York Times. And the next day, the Juvenile Law Center reached out to the student who was featured and asked him to come share his story on Capitol Hill. When I told Jay, he said, "Amy, sky is clearly the limit with Evac. From now on, you need to start dreaming crazy." And I laughed, but my mind started racing. And the next class, I told them my great idea. I thought our whole class should go to DC next week with him. We need about $10,000. So we made a video, we posted it to Facebook, and the next day, the Laura and John Arnold Foundation gave us $10,000 for the trip. That Sunday, we flew out. For most, it was their first flight. For many, it was their first time ever leaving Jacksonville. When we got there, we spoke at Capitol Hill and at the White House. And the trip got us thinking, anything is possible. So, our first class back, we made our dream crazy list. And we wrote down every crazy goal we could think of. And throughout last year, we continuously checked items off, including meeting President Obama while he was still in office. And our last class of their junior year, they got the surprise announcement that they had won first prize nationwide in Harvard and the Kind Schools Challenge. So this fall, these young men entered their senior year, with countless adults recognizing their value and praising their success, and also requesting a program formula so that Evac can be replicated citywide. So today, I'm sharing the most important step needed to replicate Evac, our story. And I asked them the most important part of our story to share today, and they said, tell them we shook hands with President Obama and then went right back to the hood. Tell them that while I checked for my letter from the White House, I got stopped and searched by police for looking suspicious. Tell them to spend one weekend in our neighborhood before making programs that decide what's best for us. Our real story is about youth who are waking up every day in a horror movie. A reality that no class, no program, no accomplishment changes. Which is why Evac is not and has never been a program. It is simply a war for hope that we've chosen to fight together through sacrificing daily, loving relentlessly, and fighting fearlessly. Here's what that's looked like for us and what it'll look like for others who'd like to do the same. Our story is full of countless people who love them and their story until they're asked to deal with the reality of it. Our reality is 2 a.m. phone calls, going to funerals, baking birthday cakes at midnight, and taking personal days to go to court hearings that end up canceled. Embracing sacrifice destroys all dreams of being or feeling like a hero. Because what you'll most have to sacrifice is your pride. Personally, Evac's been the most humbling experience of my life. I, on a daily basis, feel inadequate, disrespected, and just scared. I frequently call friends sobbing that I have to quit, that I'm not built for this, that it costs too much. And I've gotten a lot of lectures on boundaries and work-life balance, but y'all know those, right? But what I've had to learn is that those things don't exist on the front lines. War is ugly, and it costs us something, sometimes everything. We win simply by being willing to keep showing up. By far, the most powerful strategy for hope is love. Their mentors and I had to teach them, by learning ourselves, what real love and loyalty looks like. And it looks like people sticking around long term, even and especially after being hurt. We have had countless ugly blowouts that should have meant that our story was over. But love is our choice to work through them, no matter how bad one of us messes up, including me. Love looks like choosing to walk through hell together. It's us driving to graduation with our classmate when he gets the text that his mother's passed away. And it's us without hesitation canceling our lunch with the mayor to be there with him. Love is his classmate staying with him all night so that he wasn't alone. Love is us driving an hour with roses and Gatorades to stand beside him as the only guest at the funeral. In his own words, Evac is about our love for each other. A love that leads us to do the only thing we can in these moments. Stand quietly alongside each other in the midst of it. Lastly, what we love, we'll fight for. To teachers, program directors, and others who take this on, buckle up. You are about to become the squeaky wheel for the voiceless. Understand that people who work with kids are loved. People who liberate kids are dangerous. And liberation requires persistently following up, asking hard questions, and advocating for exceptions in institutions that value uniformity, expediency, and hierarchy above our kids. You are going to annoy your boss, your colleagues. You are going to be the person that makes the meetings run over. But we can't keep using statistics to label kids as at risk, yet force programs to compromise on what's necessary to overcome those odds. Those compromises turn our programs into shams that help the kids who are going to make it anyway. And they leave the very kids we're supposed to help behind to die. Hope is life and death. So, that's our story. Here's mine. Walking alongside these young men has been my life's greatest blessing, honor, and joy. They are warriors and our city's heroes. But my daily insecurity is still that I am not the right person for this. And in so many factual, real ways, I'm truly not. But by constantly bypassing reasons to label me as at risk, they taught me the power of treating others with hope. It empowers us to fly. So today, I didn't give you a 5-step plan to recreate Evac, because those steps are worthless without understanding what I hope is now clear. That you can't create effective programs for at-hope youth without knowing their story and making their story a part of yours. Because hope is not a program. Hope is actually seeing our youth who are courageous enough to fight, and about being willing to courageously fight beside them, even when it costs us. Hope is being willing to become a family and do what families do, which is stay at the table, even when one of you flips it over. Hope is about demanding our institutions start listening to our youth stories and end restrictions that make it impossible to help them. Ultimately, our only way to evacuate the cave is together, and our only hope to reach the light is in our willingness to love other people's kids as relentlessly, sacrificially, and fearlessly as we love our own. Risks have margins, but hope has no boundaries. Follow their lead. Choose hope. Thank you.